Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I am the principal attorney at the law firm. Today's review, we're going to be looking at a privacy policy. It's been offered by Dropbox. I used Dropbox a lot when I was a student. I don't use Dropbox as much now. I have services, I think, with Microsoft now, so don't really use Dropbox much, but I think it would be valuable to take a look at their privacy policy. So this was posted May 30, 2025. So we're in 2026 now. It's about 6 months old. So what we're going to look at is what are their practices. So the first question that I generally like to look at is I like to look at scope. I talked about this in some of my terms of service reviews and cookie notices. Generally, the privacy policy that you see on a website is going to cover the practices related to privacy associated with the website. Now, some other organizations are going to talk about software and services, and some other organizations will distribute their privacy policies for the applicable personnel related to processing of personal data related to their software. And then there will also be more specific privacy policies or notices distributed related to specific services. For this one here, Dropbox is talking about everything: website, software, and services. Now, the reason scope is so important, it influences the types of personal data that you'll see here. I'll give you an example. If you are talking about website processing of personal data, the identifiers that are going to be consisted inside of your notice or policy is generally going to cover identifiers you collect on the site. Let's say, for example, you do some type of marketing campaign. You might collect the name on the website, an email address, IP address, general location data. If you have a product that is a baby monitor and you create a specific privacy notice associated with the processing related to that baby monitor, the identifiers are going to be different. You might collect voice recordings, you might collect audio recordings, non-biometric photos, depending on what baby monitor offers. Your privacy practices related to the baby monitor are different to your privacy practices for processing on the website. And this is why it's really useful to have a privacy counsel help you make a determination on how to structure your privacy program. Let's get into the Dropbox one. We collect and use the following information to provide, improve, protect, and promote our services. So we can see some of the identifiers. I talked about this above. They cover website, software, and services. Now, I'm familiar with some of the services because I used Dropbox as a student. So we collect and associate with your account information you provide to us when you do things like sign up for your account, upgrade to a paid plan, and set up two-factor authentication like your name, email address, phone number, payment info, and physical address. So this is consistent with the services, right? This is why everything ties back into the scope. If you've drafted a privacy policy or notice on your site and you're talking about different identifiers like healthcare information, one of the first queries that a privacy lawyer is going to look back at is what is in scope. What have you said is in scope? They're generally going to get details about what it is that your website collects, what it is that your software is, what do you consider to be services that you've listed on your privacy policy, because from a transparency perspective, you need to cover all the identifiers associated with what's in scope. You're basically telling your consumers, which I was once a consumer, this is what I'm going to do with your data. And if there's something that's inconsistent, let's say, for example, when I was a student, Dropbox had asked me for my social security number, I would probably query that because it's not in line with the service that I'm obtaining from them. And something I want to add about that little example I just gave is if you ever have questions about how a business processes your personal data, if you ever have questions or concerns, you can always send an email here. And if they're not able to answer your question, you can contact your local data protection supervisory authority, depending on the geography that you're in. Now, the United States generally, most of their enforcement and questions and concerns that consumers have are directed towards either the business or an attorney general. This is something that's very specific in the European Union. So if you're not a European Union resident, this is not going to apply to you. That being said, you can still contact the organization here if you ever have questions or concerns. I do think that more consumers should read these privacy notices just because personal data is the lifeblood of an organization. And I say that confidently because Dropbox wouldn't be able to provide their service to you if they don't collect this information. So there's two things that I want to mention there. One, Dropbox wouldn't be able to make any money if they don't collect this. And two, they wouldn't be able to offer the service to you unless they get these identifiers. So without you as an individual, this business can't operate. So it's their responsibility to understand the laws that are associated with how they use your information, because without your information, they can't sell their services. And we know that businesses are for profit. They're trying to make money, but they cannot make money unless they have you. And without you, they don't have these insights. And if they're going to be collecting these insights in order for them to run their business, there are laws associated with how they can handle and process this information. So it's kind of like a circle. That's why I think it's valuable for businesses to at least set some time aside and speak to a privacy lawyer, because outside of Dropbox, and one of the reasons why I've provided this educational channel is I don't really think that businesses understand what is at stake when they process personal data without following the laws that are in place to, one, protect the individual, but essentially in following the laws you protect your business, because some of the enforcement actions that can be issued related to an organization could jeopardize the health, status, and growth of your organization. You may choose to give us access to your contacts to make it easy for you and your Dropbox team, if you're a Dropbox team user, to do things like share and collaborate your stuff, send messages, etc. If you do, we'll store those contacts on our servers. I want to talk about this. So another consideration that businesses should be thinking about is there's a term in the data protection space, it's called process. And process is a very broad term in the data privacy space that covers the operation or set of operations on personal data. Now, one of those operations on personal data involves storage. Most organizations delegate the responsibility of storage to a third-party provider, meaning they will purchase space from a third-party provider. You might be familiar with AWS or some of these data centers, but essentially there are servers that will store the information that is obtained by an entity similar to Dropbox. I don't know what Dropbox is doing. I'm just telling you what the process generally looks like from my work as a privacy lawyer. Now, storage is a form of processing personal data. That information is stored by Dropbox. Dropbox still has a responsibility to protect the data that's being stored. And when you look at the data protection laws, one of the requirements are having something called technical and organizational measures. Those technical and organizational measures dictate that businesses are still responsible for safeguards related to the personal data, one of which is maybe encrypting data at rest, encrypting data in transit. In order for the data to move from you to where it's stored in their servers, that constitutes an operation on the personal data under the data privacy laws. And it's a responsibility that this organization needs to be reviewing based on this representation they've made to you. Essentially what they're saying here to me as a consumer is, if I choose to give access to Dropbox of my contacts, they'll store it on their servers. That's what they are saying to me. They're saying that they will do this action. This action constitutes a processing activity. Now, one of the really important documentations that every business should have is something called a record of processing activities. There's a lot of internal documents that consumers and customers don't really have access to that generally will create some questions from a privacy lawyer to ensure that it's being documented that this is happening. And from a transparency perspective, businesses are being transparent about what it is that they do with other people's information. If you're providing your contacts are going to come with at least a phone number and probably a name. Now, some of my contacts also have birthday information, so I don't forget some of my contacts' birthdays. So there's a lot of information that could be stored by this entity. They need to be able to account for that in their record of processing activity 1. They also need to be able to account for it when they're transparent about the sub-processes that they use for their services. There's so many details that go into building and optimizing a good privacy program outside of this privacy policy. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. I'm going to try and focus more on all of the public-facing privacy documentation that consumers and customers aren't familiar with, and just providing insights into what it is that you may be looking at when it comes to improving your own company's privacy posture. I'll see you in another review.